Can I ask you a question? Can you remember the first time you were shopping online? Maybe you were looking for red socks. You can't tell those are red, can you? Those are red. Oh, you can there. Okay. No, maybe blue socks. Polka dot socks. You're going, those are pretty cool. But you decided not to buy them. And then the next day, while you were doing something else, all of a sudden, guess what popped up on your screen? Blue polka dotted socks. You thought, oh my goodness, what a coincidence. I need those blue polka dotted socks. And then later on you go, hold it. I don't think that was a coincidence. And you began to wonder what was operating behind the scenes to pop up something that you'd seen a couple days earlier, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's going on in my world? You ever have that feeling? Well, good grief, if that was several years ago, think how people are feeling now with AI. What's the future going to look like? Next slide. So, 2023, there was a research project done where almost 3,000 AI researchers were asked the question of, did they feel positive or negative about the future of AI and what it was going to do to our world? Over 30%, now sit with me on this one, over 30% said that they thought there was a better than 10% chance that AI was going to lead to something very, very calamitous for the modern world. And it could lead, even they said, to human extinction. What? Hold it. Over 30% of you are worried about what AI is going to do to our world, and yet you're going ahead and working on it. Is there something wrong with this picture? So, as I got ready to do this series, I began to read how a good number, it's not huge, but a increasing number of AI engineers know that they're in over their heads. They know they don't know what the future holds, and they don't have any wisdom that they know of they can pull on to guide them for the future. And so here's what's interesting. These AI engineers are going back and studying ancient wisdom to try to figure out how to prepare themselves for the future. And do you know where they are turning to most? Or one of the most frequent places? Genesis 1 through 11. Yeah, I didn't see that coming. I mean, here are people who I thought were skeptical and had no interest in faith, and it turns out they are the ones who are turning to the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. Now, the irony of all of that, folks, is Genesis 1 through 11 is a part of our Old Testament where the pages are still stuck together. We don't turn there very often because, well, you know, what do you do with the 7 days of creation? And really, a big boat with lots of animals and the Tower of Babel. And so we kind of set that aside over here. And so what I want to do in this series is kind of bring these two groups together. So on the one hand, I want to speak to you if you're wondering, where can I stand on something solid and dependable that I can believe in for the future? Or if you're on the other side, if you're a person of faith where you're saying, does this really have something to say to me in my life? Understand? So that's a little bit of where our series is going. Now, Genesis 1 through 11, I maybe need to explain this just for a moment. Book of Genesis generally falls into two halves. Not halves, but two parts. Chapters 1 through 11 are kind of like the prehistory. So you've got the creation, you've got the Garden of Eden, you've got Noah and the flood, you've got the Tower of Babel. Normally what we do in our church is we start at chapter 12. That's Abraham, and that's where we get into the story of the family and the patriarchs, and that's really good and applicable. I want to start chapters 1 through 11. Now, I'm going to need a little bit of help, and so I'm going to turn to my favorite dog. We could go to the next slide. It was a dark and stormy night. Charlie Brown's Beagle. Now, you may not know who Charlie Brown is anymore. It may be a little bit dated, but I grew up with this. And this dog, a make-believe beagle, he flies World War I fighter planes, and he writes stories. So he'll hammer out stories on his little dog typewriter. And everyone starts with, "It was a dark and stormy night." Why does he start with that? Because he knows humans can't help themselves. They love mysteries. We're drawn into a good mystery. And I think one of the best mysteries that we can step into is Genesis 1 through 11. And over the next couple weeks, I want to make that case. But that isn't the only part of my title. So it starts with, "It was a dark and," say it with me, "stormy night." Okay, that's the best you have. It was a dark and stormy night. Good. We know about storms here in Norway, right? Although David said that this weather that we're having today, he said, expect that all fall is going to be just like this, right? No, so it was a dark and stormy night, and here's the other half. Listening as if you're hearing it for the first time. You see, that's the one thing that I'd ask of you. I want you to, in a way, set aside a lot of your preconceptions and imagine you're sitting there hearing the pieces of the story begin to unfold like it's the first time, like you have new ears. Understand? So let's pray. Father, as we jump in here, I pray that your Spirit would teach us. I grew up with these stories. I read these stories to my children, but then like a lot of us, we think they're children's stories and we move past them. Help us to fall in love with you and your word all over again. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, folks, I grew up in a family of 7 kids. Farm family, 5 boys. Can you imagine what that was like? And my poor mother, oh my goodness, there were days that she just couldn't handle it anymore. So what my dad would do, he would call in Aunt Hazel. Aunt Hazel was not really my aunt. She was like a distant aging cousin. But she would swoop in. She had this swash of red lipstick, really, really bright lipstick, a crown of silver hair, and she wore all of these clanking rhinestone jewelry, and she had the leadership skills of a German military officer. She was tough. So think of a German Mary Poppins coming in and getting us all in line. Now, my mom was an amazing cook when it comes to comfort food. She was great. Hazel would come in and she would cook the same dishes, but they were a little bit more European and they were just different, still good, just different. And in a way, that's how I view myself during these couple months I get to be with you. Think of me as Aunt Hazel. I'm not David. And I hold to all of the core beliefs of Seacoast, but I may go at things a little bit differently, and part of that comes from some of my most recent background. I've had the opportunity to teach Old Testament and New Testament over the past several years on the university setting, and so there are going to be parts of what I'm sharing that you're going to go, Phil, that feels a little bit like a classroom. And I know that, but it's kind of important as we begin to set our course for the future. And then there are going to be other times that are going to be very, very, very practical and pastoral. So think of me as Aunt Hazel. I have a Mary Poppins bag that I may be opening up a little bit later. We'll see how the morning goes. So with all of that said, let's jump in. Book of Genesis was put in its final form right around 550 BC. It was done by refugees, people who had been dragged from their homeland. They find themselves in Babylon, these Jews, and like refugees everywhere, they're trying to hold on to some of home. You can relate to that, can't you? They're there and they're thinking, is there any future to our faith at all? And so what they do is they go out and they try to collect all of the spare strands of their books and their stories, and they put them in final form. But if you're slightly skeptical, you're going, hold it. Phil, that's a long time after the stories maybe were originally told. Can we really trust something that is like 600, 700, 800 years later? That's such a good question. What I would want to say to that, because I think it's so apropos, is I want to use a little bit of an illustration. Søren Kierkegaard, Danish, I know, not Norwegian, Danish. He's a philosopher, and he wrote, "Suppose someone invented a convenient little talking tube, which could be heard over the whole land. I wonder if the police would not forbid it, fearing that the whole country would become mentally deranged." Oh my goodness. He's describing like the television. Now, one of the questions we have to ask is, when did he write something like that? Well, we know he's not talking about a literal television because of the words that he uses. And so it goes back to, and we can trace it back to before the invention of television. When was television invented? 1927. So we know that he is writing about a time looking into the future where he's warning us about the impact of the screen. By reading him closely, we can kind of pinpoint when his story was written. And actually, just to give you a detail, he died in 1855. So this is years before the television. Same sort of idea that when we read the stories of Genesis, we don't find details that are connected into 550 BC. What we come across are details that point to something much, much earlier. Place names, what they called cats, days of the week, locations of places. When we are reading the book of Genesis, we know that its core comes from something probably 7 or 8 centuries later. Here's my point. Genesis has a very strong historical center or core to it. Bottom line, we can trust that what we're reading, its elements come from someplace very near when they originally happened. And that brings up the next question. So who would have written it? Well, it probably takes somebody living back in that time period who had means, they had opportunity, and they had motive. Is there anybody who we think best fits the story? I think there is. We call him Moses. And nowhere in the book of Genesis is the author called Moses. But Moses has means. He grew up in a royal household where no doubt he learned to write, one of the few people that would ever have been taught to read and write. He's got opportunity. He's got years out in the desert. And he has a motive. What is it? Well, when God calls him to bring all of these people to Mount Sinai, he has this responsibility of helping these people. Most of them had no idea who this God was because he just comes from a very small little family. He has this responsibility of discipling a whole new nation in faith. And there, folks, is the whole reason for the book of Genesis. He is writing to a group of people, much like a modern audience, who had all sorts of strange beliefs. The people in the slaves of Egypt were called the Apiru. It's where we probably get our word Hebrews. And the word Apiru meant the landless one, the sojourners, the shifty ones, the people without a country. Now, their religious beliefs would have been a mishmash of everything stretching from the Tigris River over to the Nile. And it's Moses' responsibility to say, okay, folks, I know you're a long way from home, and we have escaped Egypt. Now, let me begin to tell you about the God who is behind all of that. And the book of Genesis isn't just meant to be a compilation of stories. It's meant to explain just who is this God and why is he worthy of us even paying attention. I love that part of the book of Genesis. So, the purpose, it's for people who are far from God, who have no religious belief whatsoever, and also people who are insiders, people just like us. Next slide. What I want to do, though, today is give you what I call 3 hacks to really begin to pry Genesis 1 through 11 open before we start. Here's hack number 1. You need to prepare yourself to first sit around somebody else's campfire. I'm an American. I apologize for that. One of the things that we tend to do is we open our Bibles and we immediately want something that we can apply to our lives, right? We want it to be practical. Well, that's a nice idea, but sometimes you need to step back from jumping to the application and say, what did it mean to the original audience when they heard it? When they were sitting around the campfire for the first time, what did it mean to them? How did they understand it? And there is a writer that I especially like, John Walton, and he said, Genesis was not written to us, but it was written for us. Oh, I think that's spot on. Genesis was not written to us, it was written for us. And so what we need to do is, instead of immediately jumping into what does it mean to me today, I want to understand what it meant to them. And I had a great example of this from last Monday night with the young adults. Did I tell you about the California Taco Night? Yeah, I did already. Just seeing if you're paying attention. But we were talking about what it takes to get a driver's license in Norway. And maybe you can help me. I don't know if they were telling me the truth or not, but they said that it was like 5,000 USD. And I'm sure I sat there and my jaw hit the floor. What? Well, then they went on to talk about all of the classes that they would have to take. Classes on how you drive through tunnels. And my American mind, I went, that's crazy. Why would you need everything like that? And it was only later on my way home or the next morning that I thought, hold it. I need to not be so confident of my own opinions. If I lived in a relatively small country and I didn't have a lot of police officers and people who could fix things after accidents, it makes sense that you better put a lot more time into training your people to be phenomenal drivers. And you need to then be preparing them on how you drive through tunnels and how you drive on wet roads. And all of a sudden I began to think, hold it. There is a wisdom there that I need to pay attention to. So let me give you a couple of ideas here that may be brand new to you, but I think they're fascinating, and they begin to pry open the world that first heard Moses write. So here's the first one is, next slide, please. Okay. Next slide. Okay, we'll go to this one. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. Now, if you've been involved in churches a lot, this is like comfort food. It just feels right to us. But did you know that when this was originally written, there was no "the" there? That's something that got inserted with the King James Version. It was originally, in beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, Phil, what difference does that make? Well, it probably read something closer to like, in the beginning of God creating. Well, God was creating, and the original audience would have gone, oh my goodness. What you're telling me is that there was a God who was living before this creation thing that we've seen. And that was a new idea, because for all of the peoples of antiquity, the God evolved during the creative act. And what this is saying is that no, there was a God who existed and was at work before this created world that we know. Every other ancient document, ancient religion, they explain where their gods come from. It's called a theogony. Not in Genesis. Genesis doesn't answer that question at all. It assumes that God is there, and this God was active before everything in our world. That's a big idea. Here's the second one. God created the heavens and the earth. And there are two ways to think about created. There is out of nothing, voila. But here's another way of creating. So let's imagine that I was working on a sandwich this week. In my refrigerator, I have Dijon mustard, peanut butter. What is this? Mackerel filet tomate, okay? Tomato. Caviar in a tube. Wow. So let's imagine that in my sandwich making, I put together a new sandwich that was going to have peanut butter, yum, mackerel, tomato, peanut butter, did I say peanut butter already? And caviar, and maybe a little cucumber. And I put it together, and I'd say, Leanne, look at what I made. I created a new sandwich. I'm going to call it Philtastic. What I just did is that I took elements that were already there in my refrigerator, and I created something new. Most people who are specialists in the ancient Near East, they believe that when we come to that word created, it doesn't mean that God created everything just then. It means that He created all of these raw materials, and then at a later time, at some other time, He gave them a name, and He gave what He created a function. And this is an idea that we're going to see again and again in the first couple chapters of the book of Genesis, that God gives a name and He gives a function. And a Middle Easterner hearing all of this would go, oh, that's when God created the world as we see it now. Pretty incredible. So let's go back a couple slides. First hack is prepare yourself to first sit around somebody else's fire to say, what would it have meant to an original audience when they heard that, no, there was a God before time, outside of time. And there is a God who not only established things, but is so involved in our world, He stays connected into our world, and at the right time, with good thinking, He creates as humans have need. Here's the second hack. Prepare yourself to enter a story that is way more than just another story. At university, my professor said, oh yeah, the book of Genesis is just a compilation of folk tales. The problem is that now we know that's not true. We know that the book of Genesis is really a very, very intentional story where the writer is trying to say, yes, this world had a beginning point. It didn't just evolve. There is a God outside of time who has been busy. But this God makes people in his own image. Do you understand how radical of an idea that was? In Atrahasis, it's another ancient document, very, very old. And in it, it tells the story of how the gods at the center of everything, the old gods, got tired of doing all of the work themselves. So they create another tier of younger gods below them. But the problem is these younger gods started complaining. And the older gods got tired of hearing the younger gods complain all the time. So they created humans to be the donkeys of the gods, to be the slaves of the gods. That's the world that the people the slaves would have understood, that we have no real value. We are just the donkeys of the gods. Genesis comes along and says, there is a God outside of time. There is a God who established things, but he continues to create in the lives of people. And we have been created in the image somehow of this God. What does that do for your sense of self if all of a sudden you've thought of yourself as just something on the level of a gnat, and this person says, no. You are created in the image of the Creator God yourself. It changes everything. It changes how you look at yourself. It changes how you look at your neighbor. Here's another example, though. Next slide. And the next slide. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. What's interesting there, and if you've read your book of Genesis very often, you know that, hold it, it's talking about light and darkness, but the planets, or the sun and the moon, aren't going to come for another 3 or 4 verses. What's that? What's that all about? Here, verse 16. And God made the 2 great lights, the great light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth. Well, how do you have light and dark at the same time? If you don't have a planet. Here's what's going on. For the world of the Hebrews, they had always been told that the Most High God was the moon god. Second to them is the sun god. Genesis begins and tells us that there is light even before those planets existing. So if you are Barb the Babylonian and you're hearing this, you're thinking, hold it. Are you telling me that my gods are just lampposts? That they're not really anything at all? See, there's so much unfolding in just these first few verses. Moses is saying, there is a God outside of time. And there is a God who is a good creator God, for whom humans matter. And he creates in our life with purpose and with direction. Here's the third one. Third hack. Prepare yourself to enjoy a meticulously crafted piece of jewelry. I came across this image, and for me, this is an illustration of what Genesis is like. It isn't, like my professors told me, just a collection of stories. What you're seeing is that it is very carefully assembled together. There is a word that is repeated 10 different times in the book of Genesis. It's called toledot. It means these are the begotten things. And that is going to come up again and again and again in these first 11 chapters. The writer is saying, Here's the beginning of things. Here's the beginning of things. Here's the beginning of things. And what the writer is trying to say is, look, all of these things are connected. There's a big story that we're telling here. And we want you folks to get the big story of what this God is doing. And it's starting big like this, and it's going to come down to the story of one man. So what I want to do just to wrap up today is I want to give you 3 takeaways. Number 1, slide number 1. Oops. Yeah, I'll come back to that another week. I want to be careful with your time. So number 1, around the campfire, all the gods are not the same. And that's a very common thing that you're hearing in the people that you know and walk with, that, well, you know, all religions are the same, all the gods are the same. And Genesis at the very outset says, no, that's not true. We have a different opinion. Second, the arc of God's work in our world tilts always towards the good. You're going to hear in the book of Genesis that God created this and it was good, and God created this and it was good, and God created man and it was very good. And so you're seeing this ascending idea that God is moving and tilting towards good. Like the song we sang a little earlier, we may not always see it, but God is always working. And third, if you want to see God, and if we're made in His image, then don't look for Him in a building. Look for Him in the person sitting next to you. Because they have been created in the image of God. Their world was all about creating temples where supposedly the deity would live. And in the very first verses of the book of Genesis, God is in that person next to you. So much is being taught in just a couple of verses here. It's hope for the skeptic that there is a God outside our dimension, outside our time, who's active. But it also is for our relationships. So would you pray with me? Father, as we begin to plumb the depths of this marvelous book, we know these are old words, but this book speaks so powerfully into secular worlds around us right now. It's where we find dignity. It's where we find worth. It's why we pursue each other in relationship, because we know that you put us together in community to be Jesus for each other. And Father, will you speak to us as we turn some of these ideas around in our minds? Will you restore hope? Will you restore direction? Will you restore confidence in your word? In Jesus' name, amen.